This is Terry, and in this video I just want to provide a few basic tips and tricks on how to get the most out of your NP5 Prisma and NP5 Prisma Mark II. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the NP5 Prisma platform, we've got a couple of videos, one on the original NP5 Prisma and another on the newer Mark II version, up on our YouTube and Vimeo sites. So I would suggest going there to learn more details about the general design of the product, the purpose of the product, and what it can do, its features. For here, what I want to do is talk about those things that will make it perform at its best. And so one of the ways to start with that is to talk, kind of just going down the line here, we'll talk about power input. And this is something that may seem a little bit strange given that as a company we have a reputation for producing products based on high quality power supplies. And we really believe strongly that that's the key, the core, the foundation of any design. And so for us to include a wall socket mounted switch mode supply may seem contrary to that intent, but there's a purpose behind it. This was originally designed to provide a meaningful update to those users of our original streaming platform, and we wanted to make it as cost-effective as we possibly could, and realized that one of the ways of doing that is using this switch mode wall-mounted power supply. And so as a result then, you will want to make sure that you have this power supply working at its optimum, because it actually is a really good sounding power supply, and this unit, the NP5, will sound great using it. So when you get the supply, there'll be a variety of adapters for whichever power source you're using. Now, some of those will be keyed. So like the UK plug here has a ground stem or pin. It's not really active in this case, as this isn't a grounded device. Or you'll have an orientation like this, where the plugs are at an angle and can only be plugged in one way. But when it comes to the EU, you have a socket like this where there are two pins, it's not keyed, and you can plug it in either 0 or 180 degree. And it's important that you get it plugged in correctly because one of these pins will be live, one will be neutral, and it's best to align them properly with those similar pins in your AC power socket. Now, what's interesting is that in the US, there usually is a keyed plug. It's usually a grounded plug similar to the UK, slightly different obviously in shape, but in configuration much the same, and that you have a ground pin that effectively orients the plug appropriately in a properly wired plug, which we'll get to in a second, which this relates to. The thing for us though, or for our concerns here with the NP5, is that the adapter that we have in the NP5 is a non-grounded, non-keyed plug. Both those blades are the same size. Normally, they would be different sizes, and so as you can maybe see in this US plug here, one is slightly wider than the other. The wider one is the neutral, and the thinner one is the live plug. And so here again, much in the same way with the EU plug, we're going to want to get that alignment correct, live to live, neutral to neutral. And so there are a couple different ways to do this. One is by using an AC polarity checking pen. Now these are available pretty much anywhere, hardware stores, electronic stores, and you can use them by plugging them into the sockets here, this little blade into the socket, and it will light up on the live side of the socket. And in fact, it indicates here that we've got a correctly wired US socket. In the case of the EU socket, we can put it in those pin areas, and there we have a lighting up of the AC polarity pen indicating that that's the live socket, the live hole, if you will. And so with that in mind, what you would do is you would take your power supply from the NP5, holding it kind of in the direction that you would say plug it into the socket or into the wall. From the back, looking this direction, it is the right side pin that is the live pin. So when we were checking with the plug here, we realized that this is the hot pin, that's the hot pin, and so we'll simply plug it in that way, and we have AC polarity correct. Similar here with the American plug, we can do that to be able to make sure then that that right, again looking from behind, that right blade goes into the live pin. Now, one of the things that you need to be careful of with any of your sockets is that they may not be wired correctly, especially in older homes where someone might have done do-it-yourself renovation, but even in some professionally installed systems, those sockets can be miswired. And that's where the alternative way of testing might be the best way. because it allows you to go in and use this socket checker, which will literally tell you how your socket is wired. Now, this one is for a US plug, and when we plug it in, a series of 3 lights will show us how our socket is wired. And in this case, it's indicating that our socket is wired correctly. Now, it might show if we're missing a ground. It might show if we've miswired the live and the neutral. And then you can have your socket rewired so it's properly done. Now, I phrase that very carefully because I can't recommend strongly enough you're getting an electrician to do the rewiring. We're talking in many cases lethal voltages, and they may also come in and be able to do an assessment of all your sockets to make sure everything is wired properly in your home for safety as well as best performance of your audio system. If you feel confident to do it yourself, please, 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 I can't urge you enough, turn off the power. Again, we're talking about potentially lethal voltages, and you'll want to make sure that you don't endanger yourself in any way while you improve the sound of your system. So we've got the plugs, the adapters, the power supplies that come with the unit wired correctly. What can you do to further improve the power? I mean, one of the reasons for our making this decision is with the full knowledge that there are a number of great manufacturers making second-party power supplies out there that can improve the performance of virtually any unit like this. There are inexpensive switch mode supplies from guys like iFi, I think it's called the X-Power, that does a really good job, in part due to some filtering circuitry it has in the power supply itself that allows for improved performance. In fact, you can get something from a company called S-Booster that is a little filter that you simply plug in between the power supply like this and the NP5 like that, and you have then filtered power going into the unit, even from the original supply that you got. Now, S-Booster, as well as other manufacturers like Farad, make bigger, more sophisticated, often linear supplies that can further improve the performance of the NP5. Now, these come at a variety of prices, some as expensive as the NP5 itself, some even twice or sometimes 3 times the price. And we have had reports back from customers who have added these second-party supplies, even at the 2 and 3 times the price of the NP5, and being satisfied with that investment. And it illustrates the idea and the reason why we included the cost-effective generic supply. It allows those who really don't have the budget to get a really good sounding network player with full functionality. And for those that maybe want to spend a little more, want to be able to improve the performance even further, it allows them the option and almost kind of an extension of our modular design approach to make this unit sound even better than it already does with the standard supply. So once you've got the supply taken care of, then we have to talk about inputs. Now we have network connection here, either Wi-Fi or Ethernet. We recommend using wired Ethernet if you can, for a couple of different reasons. One, it immediately connects the unit into the network. There's nothing you have to do in the same way that you have to do with Wi-Fi to set it up in the network. The other thing is that we just find that performance on every level, control, connectivity, as well as audio quality performance is best on Ethernet. Now I know some people out there would claim that Wi-Fi, with the advantages, say, of galvanic isolation, might claim that Wi-Fi is the better approach, but we find there are too many compromises with most people Wi-Fi systems. Too many people are using outdated routers that are fine for surfing the web, but aren't really capable of doing kind of the carefully timed and precise delivery of information required for streaming audio. The other thing is that you also have all kinds of different things happening just within the general area around your network that could cause channel conflicts, ghosting, and any number of other kind of variables that you just don't have to worry about with the wired connection. And for those of you who have a router, say, that's some distance from your audio system, we recommend highly getting a mesh Wi-Fi system. You put the main unit where your input comes in for your internet, and then put one of the receiving units at your system so that you can wire up a switch. We very much recommend using a switch. And again, I know some people may say that shouldn't be necessary, but when you plug in a switch, even a less expensive kind of generic switch, it seems to improve the performance. And of course, there are a lot of, in fact, increasingly more and more expensive Ethernet switches out there that, again, are being well reviewed by both consumers and journalists as to the effect, the positive effect it can get streaming quality, the sound of streaming quality, up at the level of CD or higher. And so, with that in mind, make sure that you get everything connected up, preferably with Ethernet, to make sure that you have that Wi-Fi connection. Now, There is an RS-232 connecting port here, which is a very interesting feature, particularly for those who have Primare products. Again, we designed this as an update for older product, the older streaming product, which has this RS-230 input, but so do most of our other older products as well, particularly say our surround sound processors, to which this is an obvious and easy way of adding network playback to those older processors. And what you do is you connect this RS-232 cable, which is essentially a computer kind of control cable, a computer system control cable, between the NP5 Prisma and your Primare device. Then go into the Prisma app, select your device from the RS-232 menu list that you will find in the app, and that will make sure that the NP5 and your Primare product communicate properly depending upon what model, what vintage it might be. And once you've done that, you're able to control volume up and down, mute on and off, input, standby in and out, as well as input selection up and down. We're not able to allow direct access, but you do get input selection up and down, all from the Prisma remote. Now, some people have written in and asked me if you can use the RS-232 control with other manufacturers' product. Now, it's possible. We use some fairly standard RS-232 codes, much in the same way as our earlier product used standard IR codes. And so it's possible that these might align or line up, but we can't guarantee it in any way. And so only if you're able to kind of get the RS-232 codes and compare them to ours, is there really any chance that this might work. So in general, we suggest no, it won't, but it might be worth a try. But certainly, if you have a Primare product, definitely connect that RS-232 because it's really convenient then to have those controls within the Prisma app. Now, let's talk about the last input that we have here, and this is the USB-A input. Now, this is somewhat a controversial item simply because we did not prioritize USB input for critical listening or for long-term high-resolution media file storage. It's simply too volatile, shall we say. It's not stable enough, and let alone this input just simply is not the best, in part because it carries both signal and power. But there's a lot of things to go over with this input, and so I'll put that into a separate video so this one doesn't get too long, and then you can look for that to see the details about how best to use USB-A. Now, we recommend that you don't use it. We recommend that you get a self-powered network-connected drive, a hard drive, a NAS. And with that, then get a 2-bay NAS at least so that you can mirror the image or mirror the items that you have on those drives in a RAID configuration so that you won't lose your valuable high-resolution digital media files. There's a good reason for that, and I'll talk about it further in the USB video, but in the main, get yourself a NAS and connect it up. Again, it will provide better connectivity control and performance. If you insist or need to use a USB-A, and we do all the time when we go to dealer events and trade shows and like, and we just want to have a little thumb drive filled with demos we know are effective and not have to search through some large, big library on a NAS, we do take around a USB to conveniently provide input when that makes sense. However, we always use something like the AudioQuest Jitterbug. iFi makes a similar noise-canceling device to make the USB-A input sound as good as it possibly can. But here again, and not to be too repetitive, we definitely recommend hooking up a NAS to get the most out of how good sounding this NP5 Prisma and the Mark II version can be. Now, before we end, let's talk about output, and that's absolutely critical and important to discuss. There are two basic things I want to talk about here. There's volume output. It comes as a default as variable. That's for safety concerns, so you don't hook this up and has full output depending upon how you've configured the system. But we recommend fixed output. It gives you a much better, much richer, full resolution signal because the variable output uses a digital volume control in here. Now, it may be convenient to use the volume control on the Prisma application, but if you can, do it fixed, even though you may have to use another control, whether it's the streaming services app and the volume slider in the app itself, or say even the remote control for your preamp or integrated amp or processor that you're using in association with the NP5 Prisma. So for volume output, go into the settings menu and select fixed. Now the last and probably most critical setting that sometimes can be a little bit confusing is the digital output. you have two basic configurations. You have native and you have fixed. Now what native means simply is that the file resolution coming into the MP5 is what goes out of the NP5. And that's anywhere from 44.1 to 48, 96, 192 being the limit. And you have the option then in native of settling on the upper level resolution that it will pass through, bypassing the sample rate converter chip that's inside. And by bypassing that sample rate converter chip, you're able to then use MQA files, use this as an MQA pass-through, so that if you have MQA files, say on your NAS, it will pass through the MP5 untouched, and your MQA DAC, which is necessary for this to take place, will be able to then process that as an unadulterated, untouched MQA file. Similarly, if you're using Roon and you want to play DSD, this also allows for DOP output, DSD over PCM output, meaning that you can transfer a DSD signal that otherwise would not go through an SPDIF, RCA, or Toslink connector and be able to get to your DOP DAC, and you have to have a DOP DAC to be able to work with this, to unpack what is a PCM package and get to the DSD file within. So again, if you want to play back MQA files through the NP5, if you want to use DSD files using the DOP platform, only when you're using Roon, then set it up to 192 native. Sorry, I got myself a little bit confused in all the options. So again, 24192 native means everything goes through untouched. It doesn't go through the sample rate converter chip. Then, one of the things that we might suggest, though, is to try out fixed. Because in fixed, it does go through the sample rate converter chip, and it does get reclocked so that you have a more precise output from the digital outputs, whether you're using the RCA coax or the optical Toslink. And so with that in fixed mode, you not only get that reclocking, but then you can find the precise setting that works best with your DAC. Now, this was one of the original features of the NP5 that we included to make sure that even with the oldest DACs, you would be able to use the NP5 to the best of its capabilities. But I just ran into an instance that reminded me or confirmed the really wonderful use value of being able to set it to fixed at a particular rate. Toslink. Toslink was really designed to be 2496 as its highest resolution. It'll do 24192 if everything is absolutely perfect. Great cable, short length, no twists, turns, bends, etc. However, it still isn't comfortable transmitting 2492. And so if you're using a Toslink cable, I recommend highly to set your upper limit, whether in native or in fixed, to 96. That will hit the sweet spot for your DAC, or for your cable actually in this case. It may hit the sweet spot for your DAC as well. The other thing that I would suggest using fixed 96 for is that I just installed this in a friend of mine's system, a great musician, great ears, and we went through all the possible settings. It was very apparent to both of us immediately that the 2496 worked best, not only for his optical cable, but he also listens a lot to Spotify. And so while Spotify is an amazing application music service with millions and millions of files to choose from and really great kind of algorithm that allows you to provide suggestions for some of the tracks you might want to watch and so it's listened to. And so it's a great way of discovering music. However, it's not the best sounding. It is a bit low res, but you can make it sound better by upsampling it to 96 kilohertz. And so for my friend, his system sounded so much better once we set to 2496, not so good at 24192. So play around with those settings to find out what actually might work best in your system. And one final note I've been asked about, and that is that the output from this is always 24-bit. And there have been some people that have been concerned that this may somehow cause issues for a 16-bit DAC. We have people using them with really old DACs. And what happens in that instance is the 16-bit DAC just doesn't recognize those additional 8 bits. Those are zeros that it just doesn't even see. And so it effectively, for its purposes, is seeing a 16-bit 44.1 file. So with all of that information, it should be able to be relatively easy to get your NP5 just singing in your system, using everything that's included with it, or if you add, say, an outboard or second-party power supply. In any case, with the hope this helps get you all tuned up, if you have any other questions, please go to our website, go and submit a help request form, and I or the rest of the service or development team will respond as quickly as we can to any questions that you might have. Take a look at the FAQs while there. That may answer your questions as well. And certainly, if you like these kinds of videos, please follow us, like it, and we'll do our best to do more that hopefully will be helpful to you. Thanks.